I did hit both of those bonuses with this book, plus with this book, why can't I speak? Cozy, I guess, in a sense. Granted, I mean, she's murdering people, so like not super cozy. That murder mystery, because it's no mystery, just cozy murder. Yeah. Hello and welcome back or welcome to my channel if you are new here. Today I'm going to be doing my November wrap-up, which is gonna be a lot for me. But if you were interested to see all the books that I read for the month of November, specifically for the Get a Clue Readathon, then keep on watching. So I could not possibly do this video without consulting my story graph because I don't even remember what I read at this point. I read so many books. This is the most books that I've ever read in a single month. I truly don't know how I managed to do this without like keeling over, but here we go. I'm gonna try to remember which prompts I read these books for. At the very least, I could probably tell you like what the prompt was, but I probably wouldn't be able to tell you like what room it was because I don't remember the rooms. I would have to go back and like look at the Discord to find out what prompts went with what rooms. And I'm not doing all that. So most of the books that I read for this readathon, you got bonus points for LGBTQ plus authors and BIPOC authors and murder mysteries and obviously like host favorites. So I was specifically looking for books that would fit these prompts that either had an LGBTQ plus or a BIPOC or both author. The first book that I read for the month of November was The Deep by Rivers Solomon. It was the first room and the prompt was to read a book with non-human characters in it. And so this book was all about like mermaids, merpeople. And I rated this book 3 stars. It wasn't my favorite. I didn't love it. It was kind of boring. They were slaves that were cast overboard and I guess they were pregnant. And so they gave birth after they drowned or while they were drowning. And the babies that they gave birth to were these merpeople. Something like that, okay? Like I said, I don't really know what's going on in this book. It was kind of weird. I did the best I could, okay? This mermaid who, she was like a historian. And so she has all of the memories, all of the history in her brain. And so like once a year, she has to like give it to them, like transmit it to them or something. Like to the, you know, her merpeople. It takes like days for her to like give it to them, and then they like get the memories or whatever, and then after they get the memories they like give it back to her, and like that process is also painful. And so she didn't want this burden. She didn't want to be the person that had to carry around all the memories and all the history of their people because some of it was very like traumatic. So she runs away basically. I don't even remember how the book ended, to be honest. That was the first book. So we're off to a great start. Next, I read Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. And this was a book that I ended up DNFing. I think I talked about this in some video already. I did soft DNF this book. I got to either 51 or 52% and then soft DNF'd it. I do plan on reading it this month in December. Hopefully I can get around to it because I'm going to start over. I'm not going to pick up where I left off. I definitely need to go back to the beginning and start over. Good Omens was a book that I read for a room prompt, and I don't know what room it was, but the prompt was to read a book that had all the letters of your first name on the cover. And we also had a secret passageway prompt to go along with it, and our secret passageway prompt was to read a book that was a 5-star prediction. So Good Omens was already on my list of 5-star predictions, which I did a video for back in the beginning of the year. I'll link that down below in case you're interested. But it was already on my list of 5-star predictions, and it did have all the letters of my first name on it, so that's what I decided to read for that room. Next, I read The Death and Life of Benny Brooks by Ethan Long. And this was like a short, I guess this was kind of like a, I think this is considered a middle grade maybe. It's also kind of a memoir for Ethan Long. It basically is the story of his childhood, and I really like this book. I gave this 3.75 stars. He grew up, I think, in the 70s, and he basically was a child of divorce. I want to think he's like 10 maybe. He basically is like dealing with the fact that his like parents are divorced and like they don't live together anymore, and he lives with his dad and his siblings. So like his dad is his primary you know, caretaker, guardian, whatever. Like, he's the one that has the custody of them. And the mom is kind of in their life, but like only when it's convenient for her, or at least that's the way he tells the story. You know, from his perspective, it's kind of like whenever she has time or whatever is convenient for her, she'll be in their lives, but otherwise she kind of is like off doing her own thing. Then his dad ends up getting really sick, and he's dealing with, you know, learning the news that his father has a terminal illness. I like the fact that it talks about some of those heavier topics like divorce and terminal illness and loss of a parent and stuff like that in a way that is palatable for a younger audience. So I definitely would highly recommend. This is a book that I read for a bonus book, so this was not for any specific room. The next book that I read was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And I think I read this book because we had a prompt that was to read a book with like multiple POVs or something like that, and I really enjoyed this. Granted, because this book is written in like the 20s or the 30s or something, there are some parts of it that don't age well, but overall I thought the story was really great, very well executed. I liked that you got a twist at the end and then you got a twist on the twist, and I just think that this story like really holds up. This book very much had to have been the inspiration for the Saw franchise, which I thought was really cool. You could definitely see that a lot of like murder mysteries and slasher kind of films definitely took like inspiration from this. This basically follows a group of people who are brought to this mansion to meet with, I forget what the person's name was, but whoever it was, they were all coming to meet. That person never showed up, and then someone obviously dies. A couple hours later somebody else dies, and then the next day somebody else dies, and they're like, okay, clearly this is not a coincidence. Like, someone here is killing people. Like, who's the murderer? And it's basically one big book of Clue, like, which this book was perfect to read during this readathon. I thought I had it figured out, and when I got to the first twist at the end, I was like, oh, okay, so yeah, I did predict it. But then I got to the second twist and I was like, okay, did not see that coming. The next book that I read is Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. This was also a bonus book, so this wasn't for any particular room. And I loved this book. I gave this book 4.5 stars. The ending wasn't my favorite because of the trope that happens at the end. I didn't hate it, but I just kind of like didn't love it either. It was kind of like, we could have just ended the book before it got to that. Like, we didn't even need this. So this book basically follows Josh and Hazel, and they actually were like hooking each other up on dates. So like, she would pick someone for him to go on a date with, and he would pick someone for her to go on a date with, and they would go on like these double dates together. And all of them were awful and hilarious, which, if you've been on my channel, you know that I love books with a series of catastrophic but hilarious dates. So this book was right up my alley. It was exactly what I needed. It was exactly what I was looking for. Like I said, outside of the ending, everything else about this book was perfection. Next up, I read Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede, I guess is how you say the last name, and this was also a bonus book. And I also read this book for Ashley from Books to Ashes for her readathon, the like How to Train Your Dragon readathon. I'm not sure if that's officially what the name of it is, but for her like dragon readathon, this is the book that I read for that. This book was about a girl who's like, she's like this princess. She's very like independent, I don't need no man kind of woman. And her parents want her to like get married and, you know, be a lady and all these things. She's like, no, I'm gonna do what I want to do. And so she leaves. So I guess normally the dragons capture princesses, like they like take them and like make them be their servants. And so this was kind of different, because rather than the dragon like stealing her away and making her be, you know, their servant, she came to them and was like, I want to be your servant. And so they were like, okay. They were like these wizards that are in the story that are doing some like shifty, shady things, and so she's trying to figure out what are these wizards up to. It was cute, it was fun, very low stakes. It was also kind of funny, and I like the fact that this character, this female lead character in the story, was very much like anti-gender role. The next book that I read was Lucha of the Night Forest by Tehlor K. Mejia. I'm not sure if I said that name right, probably butchered it, I'm so sorry. I don't remember why I read this book. This was for a room. The prompt was to read a book that was published in the month that you were born in, and so this took a decent amount of research trying to find a book that was published in March that had an LGBTQ author and that had a BIPOC author, and so I landed on this. This book I ended up giving 3.5 stars. Again, wasn't my favorite. I do think that there are people that are going to love this book. This book just wasn't for me. Unlike some of the other books that I didn't rate as high, I didn't rate them as high because I did not like them, because I did not think that they were that great. This is different. I think that this book was really good. It just wasn't for me. This book follows Lucha, who is like this badass, like almost assassin-like female lead character, and she is trying to save her sister. There is like this, I guess it's a drug for lack of better words, that has kind of like taken over the town that she's from, and so there are a lot of people that are on this drug, and so it makes them not be able to function in society. Her mother is one of those people, and so she spends a lot of time kind of like doing odd jobs to make money so that she can take care of herself and her sister, because her mom can't or isn't doing it because of her addiction issues. Some kind of way her sister got like hooked on it. I think her sister ended up in like almost like she was being like sex trafficked, and like she was being drugged and stuff, and so Lucha takes it upon herself with the help of this random chick that she met in the woods one night. They are like on this adventure in order to save Lucha's sister and like bring her home. It's also sapphic, sort of. There's not an actual romance that happens, but it's kind of like a lot of build up to what could maybe be romance later on. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a series. It has a lot of really good elements to it. It just wasn't my kind of book. The next book that I read is Small Things Like These by Clair Keegan, and this was a book that I read for a bonus book, and I don't really remember what this book was about. It was about this dude, and it was like Christmas time or something. Was he at an orphanage or like a reform school or somewhere he went? A church? I don't really know. He went somewhere, and like he sees this girl who appears to be being mistreated and not well taken care of, and so he ends up basically like rescuing her, so to speak. Like he goes back there and, you know, takes her out of that environment and like brings her to his home in the end, to, I guess, to give her, you know, a better place to live, a better environment, somewhere where she's not being abused or mistreated or neglected, more so than anything else. I think this also takes place in Ireland, maybe. That's really all I remember about this story. That was like not a good synopsis at all, but this book is only like 118 pages. I gave this 3.25 stars. The next book, however, I do remember much more of it, and that is Dead Dead Girls by Nekesa Afia. I don't know if I said that name right. I want to think the prompt was to read a book that was part of a series, or to read a book that was the first in the series, or something like that. But then I also think that we might have had like another secret passageway or a punishment prompt or something, because I feel like we also had to read a book that was like by an author that we had never planned on reading or had never heard of before, and so that's how I ended up coming across this book. This book I gave 3.75 stars, and this book was really interesting. I liked this book because it was different than anything that I've read before. This was a murder mystery that took place in Harlem, and it also takes place in the 1920s or 30s. I can't remember which decade. And Louise is a black woman living in Harlem, and she works at this restaurant as a waitress, and this restaurant, or it might have even been a speakeasy or like a club or something. So this black club in Harlem, suddenly the women that work as the women of the night, they start coming up like kind of one by one dead. And so the police end up enlisting Louise to help them solve this string of murders. And the reason why they chose Louise was because Louise was pretty well known in the community and well respected. It was a lot easier for her to talk to the people in the community, talk to the victims' families and stuff like that, whereas the police felt like them as white men, it would be harder for them to get any information or get the people in the community to cooperate with the investigation, which they're probably not wrong. So they enlisted Louise to help them crack the case, and that's basically what the whole story is about, is her being on her super sleuth trying to figure out who's doing this. This is also sapphic, but it's also the 1920s or 30s, so obviously being a black lesbian woman is not something that she could just be out flaunting in broad daylight, so you kind of get that subplot. Next was the Chaos Round. And this is honestly where things truly just went downhill for me personally. The Chaos Round lasted 48 hours, and in those 48 hours I read 13 books. The books that I was reading were shorter books, but switching through that many different stories that quickly, my brain was kaput by the time those 48 hours were over. So I would try to quickly go through all 13 books that I read for this without going into too much detail, because like I said, they're all pretty short books. The first one was 6 Months, 3 Days by Charlie Jane Anders. I gave this 3.5 stars. This is pretty cool. This is about two people who could like see the future. The girl, I think, could see multiple versions of the future, and the guy could only see one version of the future, and so they both knew that they were going to date, and they also both knew that they were going to break up, and so they were kind of trying to see if maybe there were things that they could do to prevent the future that they knew was coming. They were trying to prevent it from happening. The next book was The City Born Great by N.K. Jemisin. I did not read this book. Similar to when I read the 5th season, I just do not understand this author's writing. I've come to terms with the fact that I just don't think this author's writing is for me. This book was super short, but I did not understand half of what was going on. I felt like it was written in like a riddle, or maybe it was poetry or whatever it was. I just didn't understand it. So rather than giving it a low rating, I just didn't rate it at all. The next book was Gmornin, Gnight, Little Pep Talks for Me and You by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And this was a cute little book, very short. It's just a bunch of different affirmations, a morning and a nighttime affirmation. I did really like the affirmations, and I like that they gave you so many affirmations. Really nice, very kind words to say to yourself, to encourage yourself, to push yourself, to kind of comfort yourself. It was really nice. I really liked it. The next book was one of my favorites out of the whole readathon, and it is As Good as New by Charlie Jane Anders again. And this book was about a girl who lived through what was basically, I guess, the apocalypse. She found some object and she opened it or did something, and like a genie came out of it, and the genie granted her 3 wishes. And so the whole thing was, you know, if it's the end of the world and you're the last person on earth, what would you wish for if you had a genie that was going to grant you 3 wishes? And so she takes her time and definitely tries to be very thoughtful and calculating when she's deciding what to wish for. And I really liked this. This was a really fun story to me. 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was Shine by Jodi. I don't remember how you say this last name, but it's about this little girl, and she's going to this school that I think is like a predominantly white school. I forget what decade this takes place in, but I know it takes place kind of like in the past. Her grandmother, I believe, is a maid for like this white family, and because she's a maid for this white family, she was able to send the granddaughter to the same school that the white family sends their daughter to. She's around a bunch of kids her age that don't look like her. They don't have the same skin color as her. They don't have the same hair texture as her. And they just kind of come from a very different background. This is like a more prestigious school, so it's like richer families and therefore kids who can afford like, you know, fancy designer clothes and stuff like that. It was a very jarring experience for her. She definitely experiences, you know, prejudice and racism, and she experiences being ostracized as a result of that, being judged, being stereotyped. And it's just this little girl, like I said, she's like, I don't know, maybe 10 or something, experiencing all of this for the first time and kind of seeing it through the lens of like a child. It was a very good story. I definitely enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Definitely recommend. The next book that I read was The Cartography of Sudden Death by Charlie Jane Anders as well. And this one was a little bit confusing. The first 2 that I read by this author were great. This one, I was kind of struggling to keep up with what was going on. This one definitely involved time travel, and it was about this girl who was like, was she a servant or something? A handmaid? I don't really know what she was for like this famous person. I don't know if this person was like a celebrity or if they were like a princess or some kind of royalty. I don't know. But that person ended up dying. And so everybody was like, oh my gosh, like what do we do? The princess is dead, or whatever that person was is dead. Like, oh no. Because of that happening, there's this other person who kind of like time travels to their timeline. And it turns out that this person is able to jump into timelines anytime there's like a very like violent and unexpected death or something like that. A portal opens up. There was a lot of like running and being like, oh my gosh, like we gotta go here, we gotta do this, we gotta chase this person. But I don't know why any of the things that were happening was happening. This story was very like like have no idea. Could not really tell you much more than what I just said, and even that was horrible, so sorry. The next one was Odd and the Frost Giants by Neil Gaiman, and this was a middle grade book. I gave this, I don't think I rated this. Probably because I didn't know what was going on. This was a book that I was reading, but like not really reading. Like, I read it, my eyeballs definitely saw all the words, but my brain wasn't processing anything at this point. So it's about this boy who goes into the mountains or something, and he like meets these like talking animals, and I don't know what they did. And then eventually he goes home, and then he like is like, Mom, like, want to go on vacation or something. I don't know what happened in this book. Okay, let's just skip this one. The next one is Stag by Karen Russell, and I gave this 4 stars. And this is about this guy who goes as like a +1 to a wedding, and I believe the person who brought him as their +1 is the sister to the bride of the wedding. They had like just met each other like recently, like maybe like a week ago or something. Like, they had very recently met, and I think that she kind of just brought him as the +1 because she, you know, wanted to look like, oh look, I have a man, like I'm not single, mom and dad, like one of those kind of things. There was a turtle there that was like the ring bearer. He was like very strangely protective of this turtle. It was kind of strange, but also like kind of endearing. And it was basically him just making observations of like just kind of like the weird things that you would observe at a wedding full of people that you don't know, and you kind of are just sitting back and people watching and observing how everybody's interacting. That's basically what it was. I did like this. I thought this was like a pretty interesting story, but it wasn't really a whole lot that happened, so it's hard to give like a synopsis. The next one that I read was The Backbone of the World by Stephen Graham Jones, and this book was super weird. At first I thought that this book was about aliens, and now I'm not even entirely sure what the heck this book was about, because by the end of the book there were people that were being resurrected from the dead. So I don't know what I don't know what this book was. It was very slow, very strange, and yeah, it was a weird one. I gave it 3.25 stars. The next one was probably my absolute favorite book that I read throughout this entire readathon, and that is The Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I gave this 5 stars. This was amazing. This is a short story that is written in verse, and it's about this young black man whose brother is shot and killed. And so he now feels like it is his responsibility to get revenge for his brother's murder. And he gets on the elevator to go out and find the person that he, you know, needs to exact his revenge on. And while he's on this elevator, there are a bunch of people that get on the elevator that are talking to him and making him reflect on his life and what he's been through and things that he has seen and heard about and been taught as a child growing up, and kind of makes him reflect on his decision to go out and get this revenge. This story was absolutely fantastic, and I think the author's note was amazing. Like, this was just the most incredible book that I probably read all year in terms of how powerful the story is, and I think it's very eye-opening, especially for people that maybe are not familiar with the culture, what it's like to be a black male in an urban American society, and some of like the rules, so to speak, that govern living in that type of culture. For the length of the story, it's very powerful. I love the message. The author's note was incredible, and just, yeah, I don't have anything bad to say about this. I thought this was just so well done, and I would recommend this to everyone. And it's so short that I feel like everyone should take the time to read this book, because why not? The next one was a fun one, and that is The President's Brain is Missing by John Scalzi. I don't know if I said that name right, but this one was fun. This was basically about the president's brain went missing. They did like a scan or something, and they couldn't find his brain in his head, but he was still like functioning like you and I. He was still talking and walking and taking care of himself and doing everything, even though it looked like he didn't have a brain in his head. And so they send, I don't know if it's the chief of staff or somebody, I forget. It was somebody that works for the president. They send this person on a mission, and he has like 36 hours or something to figure out why the president's brain is missing and where it went, what happened to it, who's behind this, who did this. It was really fun. It was funny. It was also really interesting. And it got me thinking, could this be something that the government is actually doing in real life? Not this exactly, but like, could things like this actually be real? The next book was Seedfolks by Fleischman. And this was a book that I read, I think in like 6th grade. When I say read, I mean like we were supposed to read it, but I never actually read it. This book was interesting. It was a very cute found family-ish story, but also kind of boring, not gonna lie. But it was interesting to kind of see all the different perspectives that you get and all the different cultures that you get. It was written some time ago, and so maybe there are parts of it that didn't age as well. The overall message of the story was a nice like found family, community building, bonding, whatever type of story. 3.5 stars. The last book for the chaos was Almost Like Christmas by Joseph Heller. It was definitely not what I thought it was going to be. I thought that I was getting like a Christmas story, and it wasn't that at all. I have no idea what the heck happened in this book. I couldn't even begin to tell you. It was a black man who did something, or I don't even know if he actually did it or not, but everybody thought he did it, and so he needed to be on the run because if they caught him, he was probably gonna get, you know. And that was the end of the chaos. And by that point, my brain basically malfunctioned. And so I struggled to get through the rest of these books. So the next book that I read for a room was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by, I don't know how to say this name. I'm not even gonna attempt. This book was about a girl whose husband passed away, and so she was kind of just living for thrills and just kind of like casually dating and sleeping around and not looking for anything serious. And then eventually she meets someone that she really connects with, but this person that she met that she really connected with, they have their own kind of situation where they also were married and lost their spouse as well, and they were dealing with their own grief. But these two people, you know, the main character and her love interest, was like very like controversial for them to be together because there was such a huge age gap. And also, this person is the father of the guy that liked her. Like, this dude liked her and was like trying to pursue her, and then she ends up falling in love with his dad. So there's that. I gave it 3.75 stars. This was a host favorite. It was actually Meredith's host favorite. It was a BIPOC author and also an LGBTQ plus author. So lots of bonus points for this book. I don't remember what the prompt was for this as to like why I read this book. Oh, I think it was for the kitchen, and we had to read a book that like had to do with like cooking or like food or whatever, and the main male character in this story, like the love interest, is like this world-renowned chef that has like Michelin stars and restaurants. I wasn't a fan of like the writing style and some of the language that was used in this book. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. I could understand why other people maybe enjoyed this, but I really didn't care for, like I said, the way it was written in certain aspects. I did like the romance. I liked seeing these characters deal with grief, deal with trying to work through their grief and move on, and you know, how do you live after you've experienced such loss. Like, I did like all of that. But it was some other aspects of this book that I won't get into that I didn't really care for. But like I said, overall, 3.75 stars. The next book that I read was Her Good Side by Rebecca Weatherspoon. And this book, I don't remember what their names were, but the female lead, she is a plus size high school basketball player, and her mothers are WNBA stars. And the male lead character is a photographer, and his parents are, I believe, tattoo artists. But basically, the main character girl, she asked this boy out, not the main character boy, different boy. She asked this boy to the dance. He basically turns her down, and so then she asks this other boy out, and then he also turns her down, and so she's like really crushed. And so then her homegirl is like, oh, like, well, I already had a date for the dance before I got with my boyfriend, so why don't you just take my boyfriend as like your fake date or whatever. They agreed to that, And then from their fake date, you know, if you've ever read a rom-com, you already know where this is going. She continues to fake date him because she feels like it's gonna make her look good. People, for some reason, thought that she wasn't allowed to date. And so this was kind of her way of showing, like,
no, I can have a boyfriend. Like, I will be a really good girlfriend. Like, look at me being a really good girlfriend.
And then he's fake dating her because he had 2 relationships right before her that ended very quickly. Like, they probably didn't last more than like 2 weeks or something. And so girls are looking at him like, dude, like, why can't you keep a girlfriend? Like, what's wrong with you? So he's trying to show them, like,
no, like, look, like, I'm a keeper, I promise. I'm such a good boyfriend. Like, see me being such a good boyfriend to her.
And then with any good fake dating rom-com, things end up turning from being a fake romance to being maybe not fake romance. It was a really cute YA rom-com. I read this for a room prompt. I think it was for the billiards room because we had to read a book that had sports in it. And like I said, she is a basketball player and her moms are both WNBA stars. So yeah, it worked for that prompt. Also, the author is BIPOC and LGBTQ+. The next book that I read is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones once again. And I gave this book 3 stars. This book was weird. I read it for a bonus book. And what was that? Like, what did I just read? It was like a Godzilla mannequin. I don't understand. I don't know. What was this supposed to be? This story is basically about this boy whose name I don't remember, and he and his friends find this mannequin like in a creek somewhere. They dress the mannequin up and they try to pull this prank in the movie theater. They like have the mannequin like sitting in a seat in the movie theater. And then next thing you know, like the mannequin like gets up and walks out. The main character guy gets it in his mind that the mannequin that got up and walked out the door is a serial killer that is out to kill everyone in the friend group. If the mannequin kills you, he's not just gonna kill you, he's gonna kill like your whole family. So the main character boy is like, I'm gonna save these people's families by just killing them. And that way their families don't have to die as like collateral damage. So then he starts murdering his own friends in an attempt to save his friends' families. I truly don't understand. I don't even remember how it ended because it was just very much a like WTF moment. And yeah, this is not a book that I would recommend to people. The next book that I read was, I think, for a room prompt, and that is Verity by Colleen Hoover. I think the room prompt might have been that we had to read a dark academia, but because of the secret passageway prompt saying that I could read whatever I wanted to read, and that would count towards the dark academia prompt, I ended up reading Verity. So this book was basically about this girl who is a writer, and she gets the opportunity to finish writing the series that another author had already started, and that other author was dealing with some health issues, and so she was not able to finish the series, so they hired Lowen to finish the series for her. And so Lowen goes to their home and she's like going through the office and trying to find notes and stuff about the series so she can really get a feel for like how to continue writing the series. And as she's going through the stuff in the office, she comes across the author's like memoir or like autobiography or whatever, and she starts reading it and she starts learning some things, some very unsettling, disturbing things about her, you know, the author and their family and stuff like that. And all the while she's also like catching feelings for the author's husband, and so she's kind of torn because she feels like it's not her place, and she also shouldn't be falling in love with this woman's husband, but also like the things that she's learning in this autobiography are so concerning that she feels like she needs to tell him. And some strange things are also happening in the house, so she's very uncomfortable living in the house and she feels very unsafe. And yeah, the ending is definitely something. What did I rate this? I rated this 4.25 stars. I would have to go with Team Letter because I have an alternate ending in my head that I think would have been way better than the ending that we got. And the alternate ending that I have in my head only works if you're Team Letter. And I'll just leave it at that. Whew, okay, 3 more books to go. Almost there, almost at the end. The next book that I read was I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek I don't know how you say the name. I gave this 4.25 stars. This was pretty interesting. This book was different than what I was expecting it to be because I did not know that the author was a trans woman. That was something that I didn't know until I started reading it. So that added a different perspective that I wasn't expecting. Listening to some of the things that this author has dealt with in their life and some of the challenges that they faced and some of the fears that have been instilled in them as a result of the things that they've been through. And some of it was extremely relatable and some of it wasn't relatable at all because I'm not a trans woman, but still very interesting nonetheless. So I would say if you're looking for you know, a short interesting read from the perspective of a trans woman talking about some of the challenges and things that they face, then yeah, I recommend reading this book. I'm Afraid of Men was a bonus book. I don't know if I said that. Another bonus book that I read was An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good by Helen Turstyn. And I believe this is translated. I don't know what language it's translated from. I gave this 3.5 stars. It was pretty low stakes. It definitely wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be a murder mystery. It was not a mystery at all. You knew exactly who was doing the murdering. The elderly lady was absolutely up to no good because she was a serial killer. And so that was definitely not what I was expecting. But this lady was really taking people out. But it was just funny because like she was definitely using the fact that she was an old lady to her advantage, and it made her seem like not a suspect. It made her the least likely suspect until you get towards the end and then people do start to suspect her. But the ending also wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I liked the ending. I liked the way that it ended. The last bonus book that I read was Money by Jacob Goldstein. I think the full title is Money, the Story of a Made-Up Thing, or something, The True Story of a Made-Up Thing, something like that. This book was extremely fascinating. I gave this book 4.75 stars, and maybe by the end of the year I might bump it up to a 5. This book was extremely informative. This takes you all the way back to like pre-Han Dynasty all the way up to like 2020. It's short in terms of like the audiobook is only 6 hours. I forget how many pages that is, but it's, you know, a fairly short book, but it's very dense. Unless you are in the finance world and you understand these things already, if these are concepts that are relatively new to you, you definitely want to take your time. It's not going to be a quick read, even though it's a short read. Definitely worth the read if you have an interest in finance or understanding money and how it works on a global scale, not just, you know, in America, but like globally. It was very interesting. And then the last book that I read for an actual room prompt, I decided to read Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man by Steve Harvey. And this was a movie that came out years ago, and I remember when I watched the movie, I didn't really, or like couldn't really appreciate the movie for what it really was, because that movie came out before I was really dating or experiencing how trash the dating pool is now. And so now as an adult who's almost 30, there is so much about that movie and specifically this book that I have so much more of an appreciation for and understand so much better and can relate to so much more. This was not a book that I had on my TBR. Like, it was never in my mind like, oh, one day I'm gonna go back and read this book. No, the only reason why I read this book was because we had to read a book that, like I said, had been adapted for screen, and it had to, like, the number of pages in the book had to be divisible by 3. It's not a book that I would necessarily say that I recommend to people. I do think that there are specific groups of people that will not enjoy this book because this book is not super inclusive, but because it did fit my personal like experiences, it was funny. Honestly, it was very funny, very relatable, and definitely had some good points, some good messages. Was it completely and totally accurate? No, I can't say that it was, but I can still appreciate the points that were very accurate, or at least in my life they were very accurate. 4.5 stars. Whew, okay, that was a lot. I feel like I've been talking forever. This is definitely the longest wrap up that I've ever done. Those are all the books that I read for the month of November for the Get a Clue Readathon. Hopefully you enjoyed this wrap up. If you participated in the Get a Clue Readathon, Let me know down below what were some of the books that you read. Did you read any of the same books that I read by chance? You probably didn't, but if you did, let me know. And even if you didn't participate in the Get a Clue Readathon, if you have read any of these books, let me know that down below. Let me know what you rated some of these books, what you thought of them. As always, my socials and links will be down below in the description. It is December, which means that we are currently voting on books that we will be reading for 2024 for the Soul Shelf Center Book Club. If you want to be able to vote, then join the Discord. Like I said, the link is down below in the description box. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you have not already. I'd love to have you as part of the family, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.